After selling my company for $3 million, I threw a retirement party. Right before the toast, I watched my daughter-in-law slip something into my champagne when no one was looking. Quietly, I switched glasses with her arrogant mother. Within minutes, she began to unravel in a way that was more satisfying than any business deal I had ever closed. Before we continue, I just want to say thank you for taking the time to hear my story. If you're comfortable, let me know where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now let me tell you my story. My name is Loretta Devereaux. For 40 years I was the mind, the muscle, and the will behind Devereaux Premier Logistics. We didn't just move things from one place to another. We orchestrated the impossible, managed the unmanageable, and guaranteed discretion with the silent, unyielding certainty of a vault door swinging shut. I built my world on a simple principle. Every variable can be anticipated, every contingency can be planned for, and every asset must be protected. This is the story of my final, most personal project. It's the story of how I applied a lifetime of strategic planning to correct a catastrophic error in my own legacy. A hostile variable that threatened to corrupt everything I had built. This wasn't a family drama. It was the ultimate logistical correction. The decision to sell the company was, like every major decision I've ever made, a matter of precise calculation. Devereaux Premier Logistics was my child. Born from a $10,000 loan and a second-hand cargo van, raised on sleepless nights, and an unshakable belief in my own competence. I had nurtured it from a local courier service into a multi-million-dollar enterprise that handled the intricate, often sensitive needs of corporations, celebrities, and a few discreet political figures whose names never once appeared on our official client roster. We were the silent movers, the invisible hands that ensured a priceless piece of art arrived at a gallery unannounced, that a CEO's confidential documents were transported across the country with more security than a head of state, that a bride's entire Parisian wardrobe appeared in her Caribbean villa as if by magic. My work was a complex ballet of timing, foresight, and an obsessive attention to detail. I was the choreographer, the conductor, and the lead dancer all at once. But at 62, I understood the unsparing logistics of time. My energy, while still formidable, was a finite resource. My mind, while still sharp, deserved to focus on a different kind of portfolio. The $3 million offer from a national conglomerate wasn't just a number, it was an acknowledgement of the empire I had built. A final, satisfying validation of 4 decades of relentless effort. It was the perfect, pre-planned exit. The retirement party, therefore, was not merely a celebration. It was to be my final logistical masterpiece. It was the last event to be managed under the Devereaux name, and it had to be flawless. I chose the Meridian Grand, a hotel whose ballroom had floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline, a city I felt I had in my own quiet way helped to build. The guest list was a carefully curated collection of my life's chapters, loyal long-term clients, respected competitors, the core employees who had been with me for decades, and of course my family. Every detail was an extension of my philosophy. The catering was a symphony of flavors. The floral arrangements were architectural marvels, and the jazz ensemble was timed to the minute, their music swelling and softening to match the energy of the room. It was a demonstration of the precision and elegance that had been the hallmark of my brand. It was my signature on a life's work, and at the heart of this perfectly orchestrated event was my son Donovan. Donovan was my only child, the one variable in my life that was governed not by logic but by a fierce, profound, and sometimes blinding love. He was everything I was not. Gentle where I was firm, academic where I was pragmatic, a dreamer where I was a doer. He had his father's kind eyes and quiet disposition, a man I had loved and lost to a sudden illness a decade ago. Donovan had chosen a life of the mind, becoming an architectural historian, a profession I found both noble and utterly mystifying. My concern, however, was not for Donovan's gentle nature but for the choices it led him to make. Specifically, his choice of a wife. Kayla was a woman who moved through the world as if it were a stage designed for her. She was a social media manager, a profession that seemed to consist of curating an illusion of effortless success. Her online persona was a whirlwind of gallery openings, exclusive restaurant tastings, and weekend getaways, a lifestyle that was a complete fabrication, financed by credit cards and a strategic distance from reality. She was beautiful, charismatic, and possessed a smile that could charm a room. But I had spent my life assessing people, identifying their true motivations, their core assets and liabilities. And when I looked at Kayla, I saw a beautifully packaged product with a deeply flawed interior. I saw a ravenous ambition that far outstripped her talent, a sense of entitlement that was breathtaking in its scope. She saw Donovan not as a partner but as a stepping stone, and she had been bitterly disappointed to find that the stone led not to a palace, but to a modest 3-bedroom house in a respectable but unremarkable suburb. She didn't just want more, she believed with a religious fervor that she was owed more. And she looked at me, at the empire I had built with my own 2 hands, as if it were a trust fund she was simply waiting to mature. Her resentment was a low, simmering heat, a dangerous energy that I could feel whenever she was near. And Donovan, my kind, conflict-averse son, was completely blind to it. He saw her ambition as drive, her materialism as a desire to build a beautiful life for them. He saw the illusion and he loved it. And I, the ultimate planner, saw the inevitable collision course. The sale of my company, I believed, was my chance to correct it. It was my chance to provide the one thing that could neutralize Kayla's poisonous entitlement, a level of financial security so profound that it would, I hoped, finally silence her endless grasping need for more. It was a strategic deployment of my assets, a final grand gesture to secure my son's happiness. It was a flawless plan, or so I had calculated. The friction between my world and Kayla's was not a loud, clashing war. It was a quiet, insidious campaign of 1,000 tiny aggressions, a series of subtle maneuvers and veiled comments that I, as a strategist, could not help but log and analyze. Kayla's battlefield was the family dinner, the holiday gathering, the casual weekend visit. Her weapons were insinuation, passive aggression, and a carefully deployed brand of weaponized sweetness that was more dangerous than any open hostility. She had a way of framing her breathtaking materialism as a form of aspirational love for my son. Oh, Donovan would just thrive in a house with a real study, she would sigh, scrolling through listings for multi-million-dollar homes on her phone, always within my line of sight. His mind needs space to expand. The implication was clear. His current life, the one he could afford, was a cage, and I, with my vast resources, was the indifferent zookeeper. She spoke of my success not with admiration but with a strange, proprietary air, as if it were a shared asset that was being unfairly hoarded. She would compliment my home, a place I had designed and built as a sanctuary of my own success, with a chilling addendum. "This place is just timeless, Loretta," she'd say, running a manicured finger over a piece of art. "I hope you have a good security system. It's so important to protect the family legacy." Her mother, Cynthia, was her silent, smiling accomplice. A woman who had married well and lived a life of comfortable, unearned leisure, Cynthia was the architect of her daughter's corrosive sense of entitlement. She viewed me not as a peer but as a curiosity, a woman who had sullied her hands with actual work to build a fortune, a thing she seemed to find both impressive and faintly distasteful. Cynthia's condescension was an art form. She would look at the photographs of my early days, the ones of me in a dusty warehouse, personally overseeing a difficult shipment, and she would say with a little tinkling laugh, "Oh, Loretta, you were just so determined. It's a wonder you had any time to raise a family." The unspoken postscript hung in the air. "You built all this, but at what cost? And now that the work is done, isn't it time for those of us with more refined sensibilities to enjoy the fruits of your labor?" Together they formed a united front of quiet, relentless pressure. They were a 2-person acquisitions committee, and my life's work was the company they were planning to take over. The most unsettling incident, the one that moved my assessment of Kayla from a liability to a potential threat, occurred about a month before I finalized the sale of my company. I had invited them over for dinner, and I made the mistake of mentioning the impending deal. I spoke of it in terms of freedom, of the relief of finally setting down a heavy burden. Kayla's eyes, however, did not reflect my sentiment. They lit up with a predatory, calculating gleam that was utterly devoid of empathy. She saw not my freedom but her opportunity. Later that evening, as I was clearing the table, she cornered me in the kitchen, a glass of wine in her hand, and a conspiratorial smile on her face. "You know, Loretta," she began, her voice a low, intimate purr, "once all this is settled, you'll have so much liquidity." She said the word liquidity as if it were a sacred incantation. It must be such a relief to know that you can finally solve all of Donovan's little problems. I raised an eyebrow, my hands pausing over the sink. "Donovan doesn't have problems, Kayla. He has a life he has built for himself." She waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, of course, but let's be real. A history professor's salary, it's cute, but it's not a destiny. My Donovan is destined for more. We are, and your money, it's the key. It just unlocks everything. No more worrying about mortgages, or car payments, or saving for the right schools. It just wipes the slate clean. It's not just money, it's peace of mind. Our peace of mind. The sheer unadulterated audacity of her statement, the casual way she laid claim to my fortune as the solution to a problem she herself had manufactured, was staggering. She saw my 40 years of work not as my accomplishment, but as her inheritance. An inheritance she was not willing to wait for. It was a declaration of intent, a clear and unambiguous statement of her position, and it was in that moment that I knew I had to act. My initial plan to simply gift them a large sum of money now seemed naive. A short-term solution to a long-term strategic problem. A simple cash infusion would be devoured by her insatiable appetite, and in a year she would be back. Her demands escalate. No, I needed a more permanent, more structured solution. I needed a move that would provide for my son's future while simultaneously neutralizing his wife's ability to squander. The idea when it formed was a masterpiece of financial and emotional strategy. It was a plan that would protect my son, provide for his family, and create a structure so rigid, so ironclad, that not even Kayla's most creative accounting could breach it. This would be my grand gesture, the centerpiece of my retirement party, a final stunning reveal that would change the course of their lives forever. I would not be simply giving them money, I would be giving them a future, but a future on my terms. I met with my estate lawyer and my financial advisor, two people who had been my trusted lieutenants in the war room of my financial life for decades. I laid out the objective to create a financial fortress around my son, one that would provide for his every need while making it impossible for Kayla to liquidate the core assets for her own frivolous desires. The solution we devised was an irrevocable trust. It was a beautiful, complex, and utterly ruthless piece of financial engineering. The trust would be funded with a significant portion of the proceeds from my company's sale, a sum just over $1 million. The principal would be untouchable, a permanent endowment that would generate a substantial annual income. This income would be more than enough to pay their mortgage, cover their bills, fund their future children's education, and allow for a lifestyle of comfortable, unostentatious luxury. It was a gift of profound, life-altering generosity. But the genius of the trust was in its restrictions. I was to be the sole trustee for my lifetime, after which the responsibility would pass not to Donovan or Kayla, but to the private bank that managed my affairs. The terms of the trust were explicit. The plan for the reveal was just as meticulously crafted. The retirement party was the perfect stage. It would be a public declaration of my love for my son, a grand theatrical gesture that would leave no room for doubt or misinterpretation. I had arranged for my lawyer to be present at the party, not as a guest but as a notary. The final signed trust documents were sealed in a heavy, elegant envelope. During the toast, the moment that was supposed to be about me and my career, I would turn the spotlight onto them. I would speak of my legacy, and I would declare that my true legacy was not a company but my son, and then, I would present him with the envelope. I imagined the moment with a cinematic clarity. I saw the look of stunned, tearful disbelief on Donovan's face as he realized the weight of the gift. I saw the years of quiet financial anxiety melting away in an instant. I even imagined Kayla, her ambitious, restless heart finally stilled by a gesture of such overwhelming, inescapable generosity. I believed that even she, in the face of such a monumental, life-altering gift, would be forced to capitulate, her gratitude genuine and profound. It would be my greatest logistical success. The perfect final delivery. The gift was prepared. The stage was set. The audience was assembled. All that was left was the execution. The evening of the party arrived. A crisp, clear autumn night. The Meridian Grand was ablaze with light, a glittering jewel in the city's crown. As I stepped out of my car and into the opulent lobby, I felt a profound sense of peace, the quiet satisfaction of a commander surveying a perfectly executed battle plan. The ballroom was even more beautiful than I had envisioned. The soft glow of the chandeliers reflected in the polished marble floors. The tables were adorned with towering arrangements of white orchids and calla lilies, and the air was filled with the sophisticated murmur of conversation and the cool, elegant notes of the jazz trio. My guests were a living history of my career. I saw the CEO of a tech firm I had helped relocate in absolute secrecy 20 years ago, sharing a laugh with a world-renowned artist whose most delicate sculptures I had transported across continents. My employees, the loyal soldiers who had been the backbone of my company, were there, their faces beaming with pride. It was a room full of respect, a room full of history, my history. I moved through the space, a queen in her court, accepting congratulations, sharing memories, my hand never empty as a fresh glass of champagne seemed to appear just as the old one was finished. Every detail was perfect. Every variable was under control. My son Donovan was a beacon of warmth and pride in the center of the room. He looked handsome and happy, his arm wrapped securely around his wife's waist. Kayla was a vision. She wore a stunning backless gown of emerald silk that shimmered under the lights, her smile a dazzling high-wattage display of social grace. She played the part of the adoring daughter-in-law to perfection, her laughter a little too loud, her compliments a little too effusive. "Loretta, this is beyond fabulous," she gushed, kissing the air beside my cheek. "You've truly outdone yourself. This isn't a party, it's a statement." Her mother, Cynthia, stood beside her, a silent, approving shadow in a tasteful but forgettable beige dress. She surveyed the room with the critical eye of a connoisseur, her faint, condescending smile never leaving her lips. They were a formidable pair, a united front of performative charm. But tonight I was not concerned. Tonight my grand gesture would neutralize them. My generosity would be so overwhelming that it would leave no room for their petty resentments. The trust documents were safe in my clutch, a heavy, reassuring weight against my palm. The plan was in motion. The final act was about to begin. I found my seat at the head table, a large round table at the front of the room, shared with Donovan, Kayla, Cynthia, and my oldest friend and legal counsel, Alistair. The table was a microcosm of my life, my past, my present, and what I believed would be my secure, happy future. The first course was served. A delicate seared scallop on a bed of saffron risotto. The conversation was light, a comfortable hum of reminiscence and celebration. Donovan was in his element, engaging Alistair in a lively debate about the architectural merits of the building. Kayla, however, was strangely quiet. She picked at her scallops, her eyes darting around the room, a strange, restless energy thrumming just beneath her polished surface. I watched her, my logistician's brain automatically logging the anomaly. She seemed distracted, her smile a little too tight, her gaze a little too sharp. I dismissed it as nerves, perhaps the overwhelming nature of the event. It was a minor, insignificant variable, a piece of data that didn't seem to fit the larger picture. I turned my attention back to the room, to the warm, happy faces of my guests, and I allowed myself to relax. The machine was running perfectly. The evening was a success. It was during the transition between the main course and dessert that the first critical error occurred, the first sign that a hostile element had been introduced into my carefully controlled system. The MC, a smooth professional television personality I had hired for the evening, had just announced that the toasts would begin in 15 minutes. The catering staff moved with their usual silent efficiency, clearing the dinner plates and placing a single, tall, elegant champagne flute at each place setting. A magnum of vintage Dom Perignon, my personal choice for the toast, was presented at our table. I watched as the sommelier filled each glass with a practiced, steady hand. It was in that moment of quiet, procedural elegance that I saw it. Kayla excused herself from the table, her movements a little too quick, a little too deliberate. She didn't go towards the powder room. Instead, she made her way towards the side of the room, near a service station where the waiters were preparing their trays. She lingered there, pretending to admire a floral arrangement, her back to most of the room, but her profile visible to me from my seat at the head table. My eyes, trained over a lifetime to notice the smallest deviation from the norm, narrowed. What was she doing? My gaze remained fixed on her. I saw her clutch a small beaded thing that matched her dress, held tightly in her hand. She glanced around the room, a quick, furtive movement of her head. She looked at our table, her eyes scanning the faces. Donovan was deep in conversation. Cynthia was reapplying her lipstick. Alistair was laughing at something a guest had said, and I was watching her. For a split second, our eyes met across the crowded room. A flicker of something, panic. Surprise crossed her face before it was replaced by her usual dazzling smile. She gave me a little wave, but it was too late. I had seen the calculation in her eyes. I had seen the intent, and my internal threat assessment system, a finely honed instrument that had saved my company from disaster more than once, began to scream. I did not break my gaze. I kept my expression neutral, a mask of pleasant maternal observation. I watched as she turned her back to me again, her body shielding her hands from view. I saw her open her clutch. I saw her remove a small dark object, no bigger than a tube of lipstick. It was a vial. My blood ran cold. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt thin. The cheerful chatter of the guests a distant, meaningless roar. I watched, my heart a slow heavy drum in my chest, as she uncapped the vial. I watched as she, with a movement so swift, so practiced it was almost invisible, leaned over the tray of champagne flutes that were destined for the head table. I saw her identify my glass, the one placed at the seat of honor, and I watched as she quickly, silently emptied the contents of the vial into my champagne. The act itself took less than 3 seconds. It was a masterpiece of stealth and malice, a swift, silent, and devastatingly effective maneuver. For a moment my mind refused to process what my eyes had just seen. It was a scenario so far outside the bounds of civilized behavior, so monstrous in its implications, that it felt like a scene from a movie, a dark, surreal fiction. But the evidence was undeniable. The empty vial disappearing back into her clutch. The first question was motive. What was in the vial? A poison. Unlikely. Too crude. Too risky. Too easy to trace. A sedative. Possible. A way to incapacitate me, to make me seem confused or unwell, to undermine my authority in a moment of public triumph. Or perhaps something more insidious. A disinhibitor. A hallucinogen. Something designed not to kill me but to humiliate me, to make me act erratically, to say things I didn't mean, to tarnish my carefully constructed reputation for control and competence. That felt closer to the mark. It was a move worthy of Kayla's particular brand of cowardly cruelty. It was a character assassination, not a physical one. The second question was endgame. What did she hope to achieve? To make me look foolish, to create a scene, to sow chaos, and then what? To what end? My mind raced through the possibilities, and then it landed on the most logical, most chilling answer. The toast. The moment I was to give my speech. The moment I was to announce the trust. She didn't know the details of my plan, of course, but she knew I was going to make a significant announcement. She had been pressuring me for weeks, dropping hints, asking leading questions. She had to be stopped. Her grand gesture sabotaged. Perhaps she thought that by making me seem unstable, she could create a situation where Donovan, as my only son, would be forced to take control of my affairs. Her and Donovan. It was a power play, a hostile takeover of my life, and this was the opening salvo. As these calculations flashed through my mind, Kayla arrived back at the table. She slid into her seat, her face a perfect mask of serene innocence. "Sorry about that," she murmured, taking a sip of water. "Just had to freshen up." She looked at me, her eyes wide and guileless. The MC's voice boomed through the ballroom, signaling the start of the toasts. A wave of anticipatory silence fell over the room. This was the moment. The countdown had begun. My heart was a steady, cold metronome in my chest. The hurt was gone, replaced by a crystalline righteous rage, but my face betrayed nothing. I was the very picture of a proud, happy matriarch, a woman on the verge of a well-deserved retirement. I saw the waiter approach our table, the silver tray holding our champagne flutes held aloft. He moved with a practiced grace, placing each glass before its intended recipient. I watched my glass, the one containing the tainted champagne, as it was placed directly in front of me. It looked identical to all the others, the pale gold liquid shimmering, the tiny bubbles rising in a delicate festive stream. To anyone else it was a symbol of celebration. To me it was a weapon. Kayla's eyes were fixed on that glass, a flicker of triumphant anticipation in their depths. She thought she had won. She thought the game was over, but it had just begun. My target was Cynthia. Kayla's mother, her silent partner, her co-conspirator in greed and entitlement. I had seen the look that had passed between them, the quick knowing glance that had confirmed their shared purpose. Cynthia was not an innocent bystander. She was a party to the crime, and in my world, accessories to the fact were just as culpable as the principal. She would be the vessel for my counteroffensive. She would be the one to reap the bitter harvest that her daughter had sown. The plan required precision timing, and a perfect seamless execution. I had less than a minute. I turned to Cynthia, who was seated to my right, a look of warm familial affection on my face. "Cynthia, darling," I said, my voice a smooth conspiratorial murmur. "Your necklace, it is absolutely stunning. I've been admiring it all evening," she preened, her hand instinctively going to the gaudy gold-plated monstrosity that hung around her neck. "Oh, this old thing," she said with false modesty. "It was a little find in a boutique in Palm Beach." "It's exquisite," I insisted, leaning in closer, forcing her to turn towards me. "The craftsmanship is just divine. May I?" I reached out my hand, as if to touch it. It was a simple, harmless gesture, A perfectly calculated move designed to draw her attention, to narrow her focus, to create a blind spot. As she leaned in, her eyes fixed on my admiring face. My other hand, my left hand, moved with a speed and precision that was a product of a lifetime of practice. It was the same dexterity I used to sign million-dollar contracts. The same steady hand that had guided my company through recessions and market crashes. In a single fluid, almost imperceptible motion, I slid my champagne flute to the right and with the same movement, slid hers to the left. My glass was now in front of her. Her glass was now in front of me. The switch took less than a second. It was a piece of sleight of hand so subtle, so perfectly executed, that not a single drop of champagne was spilled. Not a single bubble was disturbed. To anyone watching, it would have looked like a minor, unconscious adjustment of the place settings. But it was an act of war. It was the turning of a key, the throwing of a switch, the rerouting of a deadly shipment to a new, unsuspecting destination. I leaned back, my hand dropping from her necklace. "Truly beautiful, Cynthia," I said, my smile never wavering. "You have impeccable taste." She beamed, completely oblivious. She had no idea that she had just been handed a poisoned chalice, a gift from her own beloved daughter. I glanced at Kayla. She was watching us, a faint, puzzled frown on her face. She had seen the interaction but she hadn't registered its significance. She couldn't have. The move was too clean, too fast, too far outside her limited strategic imagination. She saw the glasses in their new positions, but her brain, so certain of its own cleverness, would have dismissed it as a trick of the light, a momentary confusion. She saw her mother smiling and preening. She saw me, smiling and composed. Her plan, she believed, was still on track. The weapon was in place, ready to be deployed. My eyes then moved to Kayla. She was watching me with a hawk-like intensity, her smile fixed, her eyes glittering with a strange, feverish anticipation. She was waiting for the show to begin. She was waiting for me to falter, to slur my words, to make a fool of myself. She was waiting for her poison to do its work. And finally I looked at Cynthia. She was raising her glass, my glass, to her lips, a look of smug satisfaction on her face. She was toasting my retirement, all the while believing that she and her daughter were about to orchestrate my downfall. The dramatic irony was so thick, so potent, it was almost intoxicating. They had no idea what was coming. They had planned a simple ambush, but they had stumbled into a meticulously prepared counteroffensive. They thought they were the hunters, but they were the prey, and the trap was about to be sprung. "Thank you," I began, my voice clear and steady, ringing with a warmth and authority that commanded the room's absolute attention. "Thank you all for being here tonight. 40 years ago I started a company with a simple idea that anything could be moved, managed and secured if you had the right plan. I built my life on that principle. I built my legacy on it." I paused, letting the words hang in the air. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my champagne. It was crisp, clean and utterly harmless. Out of the corner of my eye I saw Cynthia do the same, taking a deep, celebratory swallow from her own glass. The delivery had been made. The package was signed for. "A legacy," I continued, my eyes sweeping across the room, "is not just about what you build, it's about what you leave behind. It's about ensuring that the assets you've worked so hard to acquire are protected, that the future you've planned for is secure." My gaze settled on Donovan and Kayla. My greatest asset, my most cherished investment has always been my son Donovan. Donovan's eyes welled up with tears and he smiled, a look of pure, uncomplicated love on his face. Kayla placed a proprietary hand on his arm, her expression a perfect blend of pride and humility. She was an actress worthy of an award. "I have always believed in providing for my family," I went on, my voice thick with an emotion that was entirely genuine, though its source was far darker than anyone in the room could possibly imagine. "I believe in creating a foundation so strong that it can withstand any storm. I believe in new beginnings, in fresh starts, and in the fundamental truth that in life as in business you will always reap what you sow." The double meaning was a delicious private indulgence, a secret I shared only with myself. I saw Kayla's smile widen. She thought I was talking about her. She thought this was the prelude to her victory. "So tonight, as I close one chapter of my life, I want to officially open another. I want to toast to the future, to family, to legacy, and to the importance of knowing, with absolute certainty, who you can trust." I raised my glass higher. "To the future," I declared. The room echoed my words. "To the future." I watched as Cynthia, her face beaming, drained half her glass in a single enthusiastic gulp. The countdown was over. The payload had been delivered. I took another small performative sip from my own glass and placed it back on the table. The speech was over. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for it to spring. The first few minutes after the toast were a study in quiet, agonizing suspense. The jazz trio began to play again, a soft, melodic backdrop to the renewed chatter of the guests. People began to move around, offering their personal congratulations. I remained seated, a calm, observant queen on her throne, my eyes never leaving Cynthia. For a moment a sliver of doubt entered my mind. What if the substance was a slow-acting sedative? What if its effects were so subtle they would be unnoticeable in this crowded, chaotic room? Had my counter-move been too subtle, too clever? Had I miscalculated? But then, I saw it. The first sign. Cynthia, who had been engaged in a conversation with the wife of one of my clients, suddenly stopped mid-sentence. A strange, glassy look came over her eyes. She blinked slowly, like a lizard waking in the sun. She shook her head slightly, as if trying to clear a sudden fog. The woman she was talking to looked at her with a puzzled expression. "Cynthia, are you all right, dear?" she asked. Cynthia stared at her for a long moment, and then, a slow, foolish grin spread across her face. "All right?" she slurred, her voice suddenly 2 octaves too loud. "I'm better than all right, honey. I'm rich." A pocket of silence fell around their table. The woman's polite smile froze on her face. Cynthia seemed not to notice. She was just getting started. The substance, whatever it was not a sedative. It was a wrecking ball. A chemical crowbar designed to pry open the carefully locked vaults of her discretion and spill their toxic contents for all the world to see. It was a truth serum, a social poison, and it was working with a brutal, terrifying efficiency. "That's right," Cynthia declared to the stunned faces around her. "My little girl, my Kayla, she's a genius, a goddamn genius." She gestured wildly with her champagne flute, sloshing the tainted liquid onto the pristine white tablecloth. "She finally did it. She finally got that old witch to open the purse strings." The term old witch hung in the air, a stunning, brutal grenade of disrespect. A wave of shocked murmurs began to ripple through the ballroom. I saw Donovan's face, his proud smile collapsing into a mask of pale, horrified confusion. He looked at Kayla, who was staring at her mother, her own face as white as a sheet. The panic in Kayla's eyes was a beautiful, glorious thing to behold. This was not part of her plan. This was a catastrophic system failure, a nightmare of her own creation. Cynthia was now on her feet, swaying slightly, her face flushed with a grotesque, triumphant glee. She was no longer speaking to the people at her table. She was addressing the room. 40 years she sat on that money, she bellowed, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at me. 40 years of pinching pennies and talking about logistics while my daughter and her brilliant husband had to live in that little box of a house. It's a crime, that's what it is. A crime against good taste. The scene was escalating with a terrifying, beautiful momentum. Guests were turning in their seats, their faces a mixture of shock, fascination, and disgust. My carefully orchestrated evening of elegance had just been hijacked, transformed into a grotesque, public spectacle of greed and madness. And it was all Kayla's doing. This was the chaos she had intended for me, the humiliation she had planned. And now, it was being visited upon her own mother, magnified 100-fold. Cynthia grabbed the arm of a passing waiter, her grip surprisingly strong. "You see this dress?" she demanded, holding up a piece of her beige sleeve. "This is a placeholder. A placeholder. Soon my Kayla will be dripping in diamonds. We'll have a house in the Hamptons. A driver. We're going to liquidate that old woman's assets and live the life we were always meant to live." The word liquidate was the final, damning piece of evidence. It was the confession, the smoking gun, delivered in a drunken, slurring roar for all to hear. The humiliation was absolute. The betrayal was laid bare. I looked at Kayla. Her face was a crumbling ruin of her earlier composure. Tears of rage and panic were streaming down her cheeks, ruining her perfect makeup. She was trying to get to her mother, to silence her, but she was trapped in her seat, paralyzed by the sheer catastrophic scale of the disaster. And then, I looked at my son. Donovan was frozen, his face a study in agony. He was looking at me, his eyes pleading, begging me to do something, to stop this, to fix this. But he did nothing himself. He did not stand up. He did not defend my honor. He did not confront his wife. He just sat there, a silent, helpless spectator to his own family's implosion. His inaction was his verdict. His silence was his choice. In that moment, the last vestiges of my maternal, protective love for him withered and died. He was not a victim in this. He was a collaborator, a willing, silent partner in their campaign of greed. The chaos had reached its peak. Cynthia was now attempting to climb onto her chair, her speech devolving into a series of incoherent, triumphant shrieks. It was time to end it. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand. I simply made eye contact with two men standing discreetly near the ballroom exit. They were not part of the hotel staff. They were my own private security detail, two former military professionals who had been on my personal payroll for over a decade. They were a permanent, invisible part of my life's logistics, a contingency I had planned for long ago. They had been instructed to watch for any disturbances. They were now watching me, waiting for the command. I gave a single sharp, almost imperceptible nod of my head. It was the only signal they needed. They moved with a silent, terrifying efficiency. They converged on Cynthia, their movements swift and decisive. One took her by the arm, the other spoke in a low, authoritative voice. The spectacle was over. The threat was being neutralized. As they escorted the now sobbing, incoherent Cynthia from the room, I turned my gaze to Kayla. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. She knew. In that moment she knew that I had seen everything. She knew that I had outplanned her, outmaneuvered her. She knew that she had not just failed. She had been utterly, comprehensively, and brilliantly defeated. My face remained a mask of calm, regal composure, but my eyes delivered the final, chilling message. I looked at her, and with a cold, final certainty, I gave her a slow, deliberate wink. The party was over. The war had just been won. I did not go home. I went to my office, the headquarters of Devereaux Premier Logistics, a building that was for a few more days still mine. I spent the night in my spacious top-floor office, the city lights spread out before me like a blanket of scattered diamonds. I did not sleep. I planned. The emotional shock, the deep, ragged wound of my son's betrayal, was a fire I refused to let consume me. Instead, I channeled it. I turned the heat of my rage into the cold, clean energy of strategic thought. The trust I had so lovingly, so meticulously created for Donovan and Kayla, was the first casualty. It was a monument to a future that no longer existed, a future that had been poisoned at the root. It had to be dismantled. The $1 million endowment had to be recalled, rerouted and redeployed. The fortress I had built to protect my son would now become a wall to permanently exclude him. The 9 a.m. meeting was not a discussion, it was a briefing. I arrived 5 minutes early, a detailed multi-page document in my hand. Alistair and my financial advisor, a sharp, no-nonsense man named David, were already there, their faces grave. I wasted no time on pleasantries. I laid out the events of the previous evening with the dispassionate clarity of a CEO, delivering a post-mortem on a catastrophic project failure. I presented the facts, the attempted drugging, the public confession of their financial ambitions, and my son's silent, complicit cowardice. When I was finished, a heavy silence filled the room. David was the first to speak, his voice tight with a controlled fury. "This is not just a family matter, Loretta. This is attempted assault and a clear case of premeditated financial coercion. We can pursue legal action." I held up a hand. "No," I said, my voice leaving no room for debate. "The legal system is a blunt, messy instrument. It is public, it is slow, and it is beneath me. My response will be private, swift and absolute. It will be a financial execution." I slid the document across the polished mahogany table. "This is the new plan," I said. The document detailed the complete and total dissolution of the trust. The $1 million was to be immediately redirected. I instructed David to liquidate a number of my more conservative investments and combine them with the trust fund, creating a new, larger pool of capital. The objective was no longer to provide for my family's future, but to create a new one for myself, one that was entirely divorced from them. The counteroffensive was in motion. It was a series of silent, digital transactions, a war waged, not with words but with wire transfers and notarized signatures. It was clean, it was ruthless, and it was final. The next step was to formalize the separation. This was not just about money. It was about legacy. My entire life's work, the fortune I had built from nothing, was a testament to my values: hard work, integrity, and strategic intelligence. To leave that legacy to a man who had demonstrated none of those qualities, who had stood by while his wife attempted to destroy me, was anathema. It was a contradiction I could not abide. My will? A document that had for 30 years named Donovan as the sole heir to my empire had to be rewritten. Alistair, ever the pragmatist, advised caution. Loretta, he is your only son. Are you certain you want to take a step this permanent, perhaps a probationary period, a smaller inheritance? I cut him off with a look. Alistair, I said, my voice quiet but unyielding, a compromised asset is a liability. A flawed component in a critical system must be removed and replaced. My son has proven himself to be a flawed component. The decision is not emotional, it is logistical. He is to be excised. The process of erasing him from my life was methodical, a systematic dismantling of the future I had once envisioned. I sat with Alistair for hours, going through every line of my estate plan. Donovan's name was struck from every clause, every provision. The final piece of the counter-offensive was the communication, or rather the lack thereof. My phone had been buzzing incessantly with calls and texts from Donovan. I ignored them. The silence that followed was profound. The storm of their frantic, desperate attempts to contact me raged on, but it raged against a wall of impenetrable silence. I had cut off all lines of communication, all points of access, their panic, their regret, their inevitable theatrical apologies, they were all firing into a void. I heard about the fallout, of course. The world of high society in which I moved was a small one, and news, especially scandalous news, traveled fast. I heard it through the discreet, sympathetic murmurs of my friends, through the carefully worded reports of Alistair. The story that circulated was the one I had carefully crafted, that Cynthia had suffered a severe, public and deeply embarrassing psychotic break, triggered by a bad reaction to her medication. Kayla, it was said, was mortified and the family was dealing with the crisis in private. It was a plausible, face-saving narrative that protected my reputation and cast them in a tragic rather than villainous light. But the private consequences for them were, I gathered, catastrophic. Their lifestyle, I had long suspected, was a house of cards built on the assumption of my future generosity. They had been living on credit, leveraging a future inheritance that they now knew would never come. The first sign of their collapse came about a month after the party. A friend of mine who sat on the board of the private school where Kayla had been so desperate to send their future hypothetical children, mentioned that Kayla had quietly withdrawn their preliminary application, citing unforeseen financial circumstances. Then came the rumors of arguments, of a tension in their marriage that was palpable to anyone who saw them. Donovan, I was told, was a ghost of his former self, his gentle academic demeanor replaced by a haunted, anxious energy. Kayla's vibrant social media presence, once a constant stream of curated perfection, went dark. The gallery openings and champagne brunches ceased. The illusion could no longer be maintained. The capital had run out. The most direct evidence of their desperation came in the form of a series of voicemails that Donovan left on my office line, a number he knew I rarely checked but had not yet disconnected. My assistant, a woman of formidable discretion, compiled them for me. I listened to them once in the quiet of my new office, the headquarters of my fledgling foundation. I listened to them not with any intention of responding, but as a final data point, a final piece of market research on the man my son had become. The first messages were angry, accusatory. How could you do this, Mom? How could you cut me off without even a conversation? This is my life, my future you're destroying. The next were pleading, full of a pathetic, self-serving remorse. It was a mistake. Kayla made a terrible mistake. She's sorry. I'm sorry. Please, just talk to me. We can fix this. The final messages were simply the sound of a man broken. Just his ragged breathing, a few choked sobs, and a whispered, "Mom, please." I listened to them all, my face a mask of stone. I felt a flicker of something, a ghost of the maternal love I had once felt, a pang of sadness for the good, kind boy he had once been. But it was like mourning a person who had died long ago. The man who left those messages was a stranger to me, a weak, cowardly man who had made his choice. He had stood by and watched as his wife prepared to sacrifice his mother for a life of unearned luxury. He had chosen his side, and he had lost. I deleted the voicemails. The data had been collected. The case was closed. 6 months passed. 6 months of quiet, focused and deeply satisfying work. The DeVero initiative was no longer an idea. It was a reality. We had an office, a board of directors comprised of some of the sharpest minds in the city, and a growing stack of applications from brilliant, hungry young entrepreneurs. I had found my new purpose. I was back in the business of building not a logistics company but a legacy of opportunity. My days were filled with meetings, with business plans, with the vibrant infectious energy of people who were determined to create their own futures. I was happier, more fulfilled than I had been in years. The toxic weight of my son's family, a burden I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying, was gone. I had amputated the diseased limb and my own life had flourished in its absence. The final act of their drama reached me not as a desperate plea or a second-hand rumor, but as a cold, impersonal piece of public information. I was at a charity luncheon sitting at a table with a prominent divorce attorney I knew socially. We were making small talk when she leaned in, a look of professional discretion on her face. "Loretta," she said, her voice low, "I hope you don't mind me mentioning this, but I thought you should know. Your daughter-in-law, Kayla, has retained a lawyer from my firm. She's filing for divorce from your son." I kept my expression neutral, taking a slow, deliberate sip of my water. "Is that so?" I said, my voice a calm, even murmur. The attorney nodded. "It's going to be a messy one, I'm afraid. She's claiming, well, she's trying to argue that Donovan misrepresented his financial prospects. She's claiming she was promised a certain lifestyle, a certain inheritance that has failed to materialize. She's going after him for everything he has." I thought of what Donovan had: a modest house with a large mortgage, a university professor's salary, a mountain of credit card debt that Kayla had undoubtedly accumulated in his name. He had nothing. She was a predator, a scavenger, and she was now turning on her own weakened mate, trying to strip the last remaining scraps of meat from his bones. It was a fitting end to their sordid little partnership. Their alliance had never been based on love. It had been a business merger, and Kayla was now liquidating her failed investment in my son. The official confirmation came a few weeks later. I was stepping off the stage after giving the keynote address at the official launch event for my foundation. The applause from the crowd of supporters, investors, and the first class of DeVere Initiative Fellows was still ringing in my ears. I felt a profound sense of accomplishment, of a future reclaimed and repurposed. I checked my phone, and a news alert from a legal journal I subscribed to caught my eye. The headline was stark: DeVere, high-profile divorce filing cites loss of expected inheritance as grounds for separation. The article was a brief, sanitized account of Kayla's filing, but the implication was clear. She was attempting to turn her own monstrous greed into a legal strategy to paint herself as the victim of a broken promise. I read the headline and I felt a brief, sharp pang of sadness. Not for Kayla and not even for Donovan. I felt sad for the waste of it all. The waste of my love. The waste of the beautiful, secure future I had offered them. A future they had set on fire with their own hands. But the sadness was a fleeting thing, a passing shadow. It was quickly replaced by a sense of calm, resolute closure. This was the final entry in the logbook, the final report on a project that had been terminated. Their self-inflicted ruin was complete. I dismissed the notification, slipping the phone back into my clutch. An ambitious young woman with a brilliant idea for a biotech startup was waiting to speak with me. She was the future, my future, and I turned my back on the wreckage of the past and walked towards it, my head held high. The final delivery had been made, the account was closed.